Good morning, everyone, or good day. It's morning for me.
Morning, Kim.
Share the meeting notes in the chat, and then I will share my screen. Cool. All right, that's for next time. Yeah, there was a cool post from it's SLSA. If people, I don't have the link here, but how they're reaching SLSA level 4. And so, yeah, I see Avishek added a potential future talk on this. So I don't know if anyone knows about that or can speak to it. That would be awesome to see in the future. All right, anyway, back to agenda for today. Anyone new on the call that wants to say a quick hello and what interests you about salsa or guacamole?
Yeah, so I'm Markus Meister from SLSA. So
Oh,
I actually was able to make it today. Yeah, I'm distinguished engineer at SLSA and was part of our salsa efforts. So for the gap analysis for our systems and to fill in the gaps that were identified. So I can talk about it a bit today or in a later session, whatever you prefer.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks and welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, if we have time today, it'd be awesome. Right, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, and obviously, I don't think we'll have enough time for like a full-fledged demo or anything like that, but yeah, even just like a brief, discussion would be pretty cool.
I can't look up your last name, Marcus, to put it on here, but I'll just leave it that someone can fix it for me. Sweet. Anyone else new on the call today wants to say hello?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Toyan Manov. I'm the head of the Pro Security team at SLSA. Also work with Marcus on the achieving the SLSA level 4 compliance for SLSA.
Awesome. Welcome.
And hi everyone. My name is Ivan Teblin, and I'm head of solution certifications at SLSA. So working very closely with Stoyan's teams and Marcus in product security.
Sweet. Last call. Cool. All right. Well, welcome everyone. So Joshua, you are the first on the list. I don't see you on the call, but I can't see everyone.
I'm here.
Sweet. Take it away.
I was volunteered to talk about this. Effectively, so we've been talking a bit about how the project's organized and the calls now. We've got a fairly significant number of participants for the calls each week and enough stuff to talk about that we can't cover everything that's happening within the project. So we've started to think about forming like working groups or whatever, some other term, but tactical teams focused around different goals of the project to try and have a smaller set of people that we can gather to do like working meetings and progress some of the open like efforts that have been proposed in the roadmap. So and you can see in the minutes we've got 4 possible groups that we could form. So focusing around getting the 1.0 version of the spec out, one focused around alignment with standardization efforts, particularly the SSDF framework from NIST, I think, and all the SBOM efforts that are happening. One work stream, as Isaac suggested, focused around tooling, and another focused around vulnerability management. That one is a little bit more speculative, probably looking at post SLSA 1.0. So yes, I don't know, Kim, if you have anything you wanted to add there, or Kim's Kim's muted and hidden. So maybe
Yeah,
not.
yeah, she had to just step out for a second. So she asked me to take over here for a minute. I think, once again, just to be clear to the group here, the big thing is like, obviously all of these groups are open. We want to make sure that it's clear that it's not like some sort of closed group. Anybody's allowed to sort of participate and contribute, but we do want to make sure that like, hey, your participation in these groups should mean that you are sort of dedicating at least some time here. There's no currently, once again, this is just like a pitch. I believe there's no actual times for anything yet. Yeah, I think that's a good question. Like, will tooling just be part of the OpenSSF secure tooling group or be something separate?
Yeah, it's a good
and
question.
I think there's going to be some, like for example, also I think the same question goes for vulnerability management, since there's already a vulnerability working group.
Yeah, so good questions. I think nothing, this is just like the seed of an idea. And the main motivation is to be able to get, to make progress on some of the things that might require discussion and consensus building, but probably don't need all 30 participants in the call to be involved. So there's definitely no intent of any kind of exclusion. I am in a different time zone to many of the SLSA contributors, so I'm encouraging that we, like if we are going to hold meetings, we give significant notice so that folks can choose to join or not, and that we capture, like any good open source projects, we'll capture any outcomes in a public place. And if you have ideas about how to achieve this, recommendations, or success stories from other similar efforts, then we'd be happy to hear them and learn from them. And as for the question of like alignment with other OpenSSF working groups, I suspect there will be some attempts to kind of interact. I should emphasize that these work streams are specifically focused around SLSA, so it's not generic security tooling, it's tooling to generate, for example, SLSA provenance metadata. So go ahead, Mike, you've got your hand raised.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to, I think I agree with you on all those points. Why am I blanking all of a sudden? I'll get back to it. Sorry.
Sure.
Isaac.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan of this idea. Really love it. I think it'll create some concentrated effort to actually move things forward. I agree. Like these, I think anyone who wants to show up and participate in these things totally welcome. There's no exclusionary intent. I think it's just that like the intent is convergence and forward motion on a number of things. So I think, the one suggestion I'd have is potentially the alignment with SSDF and SBOM one. We generalize into alignment with adjacent concerns, and that group can start with SSDF and SBOM, but potentially over time we may want to look at SCIP, we may want to look at other things within the context of that work stream.
Yeah. So one quick thing I remembered what I was going to say. Actually, one of the things I think is useful, and that I've seen be useful, and would love to get other folks' thoughts is I really like how the CNCF security tag handles some of this stuff, which is they sort of like they split out the different sort of work streams, and then like a meeting like this would be available for sort of updates from those work streams. Like that would be like the first like 15 minutes of the meeting or whatever is usually dedicated to, hey, are there any updates from this work stream? Anything that should be brought to the larger group, and those sorts of things.
Sounds good. Yeah, I like the idea of bringing the updates back to this meeting.
Agreed. Yeah. Well, we could even have standing agenda items in this meeting, or we have a 5-minute or 2-minute readout from someone in one of those work streams. I think it's a terrific idea to help keep things visible, and a continual invite for people in the community to come and join those work streams.
So it sounds like we've got a lot of support for the idea, and we just need to, or we need to try and firm up the details. Brandon, looks like you've got. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to share a little bit about like how at least like CNCF we do the working groups and stuff like that. I think we found that having a kind of proposal around the deliverables would really help drive the working group. If not, it kind of comes. If not, it kind of like goes into many directions. So I think that's helpful if we have anything that we can kind of like list out as like particular deliverables.
Sounds good. In the chat, someone Abhishek's asked how often would these work streams meet? When we so I think we shouldn't like try and add loads of meetings or even necessarily even standing meetings, but one idea that would a couple of ideas that were proposed were on the kind of opposite week to this call maybe, or another idea might be to shorten this call and use the second half of it for a working meeting on one of the workstream topics, or even just breaking out into separate meetings for the different work streams. That might be a good way forward. One of the primary motivating factors is like making the meeting effective for each of the participants. So a lot of people that join have different priorities. So being able to break out into working meetings, the second half of the meeting might be a good way forward. Any and all ideas welcome. I know a lot of people have a lot of meetings and wouldn't be too excited about adding another regular one to the calendar. So if you've got creative ideas, I'd love to hear them.
I really like the opposite weeks idea. That's a terrific idea. Big plus one for me on that.
I think that does conflict with is it the supply chain integrity working group, Kim?
I think that one's the day before now.
Okay, sweet.
So-
Yeah, that one's Wednesdays.
Yeah, that's on Wednesdays. So one quick thing, and I think it's probably sort of related to at least some of this stuff is I have a feeling, most likely it'll start one way and then over time shift a little bit. I think one of the big things here that I know we want to, that I know is a big one, like the SLSA 1.0 thing here of like, hey, there's, as since we started a little less than a year ago, a lot of folks have, a lot of stuff has sort of changed, and there's also been a reasonable amount of confusion on like, hey, what does this thing count as SLSA? Does this thing not count as SLSA? Oh, hey, here's a big gap in what we're doing. So I think a lot of this for now is also very much like a short term. Hey, we need to get some big things done sooner rather than later to stop some of that confusion. Because if folks are keeping an eye on the GitHub, you'll notice there's a lot of folks asking the same, opening up similar GitHub issues about either a confusion with a thing or saying, hey, how are we mapping to other things and that sort of stuff. So I think we want to also, as part of this, like really get together and start pounding out some of that work. And then, and I'm sure over time, if after 3 months go, okay, we did this whole bunch of stuff, and now some of those work streams are maybe, not don't have as much to do, we can probably, switch it up, make it more part of the regular meeting, whatever.
Yeah, and the work streams are aligned to things or the straw person work streams in the doc are aligned to the like themes in the roadmap. So it's entirely possible that in 6 months' time we review the roadmap and say, well, that work stream, like Mike said, is wrapped up, but we're going to start a new roadmap with a different work stream and change meetings for that.
Cool. Any other comments on that? I'm excited. So I think next steps are kind of figure out a time. It sounds like there's some strong support for switching up every other week or adding another weekly.
I will take an action item to try and schedule something, or provide to refine for next steps, get something more concrete together.
Sweet.
Thanks, Joshua. Please pull me in if I can be at all helpful. This is Isaac. And should we use this Slack to coordinate and give updates to the team more generally if there's updates before the next community meeting?
Sounds good. Yeah, Slack. I think the Slack's more alive than the discussion group, so we'll use that.
Yes.
Sounds good.
I'm on the team, Joshua. Let me know how I can help.
Thanks.
All right, next on the list is Sam.
All right, so my apologies, maybe this is already answered somewhere in GitHub, Michael, as you said, this is just another one of these like confusion about the thing items, but I thought I'd bring it to this group. We're in the process of getting ready to automatically generate provenance for all artifacts that are built inside of GitLab, and we're working on our first iteration towards that. And we ran into some confusion around the identifies build instructions portion of the provenance spec. So I just wanted to take it to this group and get your thoughts on that, what exactly that should be. I could see actually potentially 3 different things that could be. I could see that being like a list of the environment variables, especially in the context of GitLab and building something inside of GitLab. It could be those environment variables that are passed into the CI job. It could potentially be like the variables itself or the script portion of the build job, or maybe it means like the exact command that's used, like if it's a make command, what parameters are passed into that make command. And I wasn't really sure which of all of those it would be. And then it also was brought up that there's some potential for secrets to be exposed, because actually, there are a lot of different builds out there. And if we're turning this on by default for all of the builds that are done on GitLab, there's the potential that those would include secrets of some kind for any of those 3. So I just wanted to get some guidance from this group on what your thoughts are, what should be included there, and how might we mitigate that risk of secret exposure?
So I think, and this is once again, just is the way we've been interpreting it, is as much as is possible, it's been the inputs to whatever the build service does. So if the build service says, I'm spinning up a thing with these things, it would be the inputs there. SLSA still is flexible enough where if for some reason, you're not doing it that way, and how you're just sort of saying like, hey, I'm running some shell script, and then your inputs would be the inputs to that shell script, something like that. So I think there's some flexibility there, but if you combine it with some of the other sort of build service should be doing these things sort of requirements, then it's essentially whatever the build service is doing. So like, as an example, it's like something like Tecton. It would be like the inputs to the Tecton task. Or if it's Jenkins, it's like the inputs to the Jenkins step.
So would it be the inputs to that specific build step, or would it be, so again, like in GitLab, we have environment variables, and those get applied to the entire CI pipeline when it kicks off, the CI pipeline as a whole. And then you also potentially have those environment variables also act as inputs into each of the different jobs that get run, and then you have your individual build job with the script that gets executed there. So again, I'm just still struggling a little bit to map that back to like, I guess that probably, from the way you describe it, it sounds probably the closest match to that would be all of the environment variables that are configured. Yep. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it would be all the environment variables, and if things are done the right way, they should be able to, like, if those environment variables, and you see it's like, okay, those environment variables and maybe the entry hook inside is this shell script, somebody who has access and whatever is auditing can go back and say, oh, okay, well, the shell script hook that they used was this one. I can go back and then look at the environment variables, look at the shell script or whatever, or look at, how it's called and be able to pull that through and be able to, determine like what was actually run. I think because at the end of the day, it's all about like the goal here is just to kind of figure out if somebody was auditing and had access to everything they needed to have access to, could they essentially replay the build?
Got it. Okay, so that makes sense as far as what the spec is requiring. I guess the follow-up question to that then would just be, of course, it's not best practice to expose secrets in that way, but we actually have, environment variables can be configured as protected. They also can be configured as hidden. And so generally, users will put secrets there, and actually it is considered reasonably safe to put secrets in that are protected or hidden. A lot of users will do that, and some users will still put in secrets that are not protected or hidden variables. And it sounds like what we're actually looking for here to meet the requirement would require us to output all of the variables, even if they are protected or hidden, so that they could fully reproduce that build. But then at the same time, if we're publishing that as an artifact, there's some potential there for secret exposure. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on how to balance that?
Eric?
Yeah, so my opinion is just thinking about the various SLSA levels and compliance or for provenance capabilities is really, you kind of tie this into using other tools in the pipeline. It's important to make sure that all of your configurations like secret keys, other components are not exposed at all. That's a huge issue with security. So in this context, using tools, as I noted in the chat, like Whispers or Blue Bracket or other components that will actually scan your code at various times in a pipeline to verify that none of those are accessible would be a key component. I don't believe that any of the reports should have any of that data in them. It should note that there is a potential issue and where and what file it exists in, but I don't know that we ever want to expose that data, because that's yet another potential security risk above and beyond the fact that someone could hack the file and see it. Exposing it in logs or reports would just further expose it. So that's definitely something I would recommend against. I don't think they're, in a perfect world, if you're following kind of best practices or good practices, as the case may be, you really don't want to have any of those critical or crucial keys or identifying or secure authentication type of components inside of any of your files, which I think, I certainly heard others say, but it really should be part of the maturity or the level to decide, have you met this level because you're incorporating these types of scans into your process, and something for the group to consider. That's kind of how we're interpreting it and how we're trying to implement SLSA based on the components in our own pipeline.
Yeah, so just a minor clarification there. These variables or potential secrets would not actually be stored in files in the repository, but they would just be being passed in as environment variables. But it sounds like your suggestion is just to avoid passing in secrets of any kind, which I know at least for some organizations, some builds may still require those.
Well, but even so, if you're automating this process, which would be the recommended way of doing it, you can certainly make those variables that are passed in, come from an encrypted source, and they're not something that's being manually entered or allowed to be manually entered. Right? This is the conversation about at what level are we fully automated versus somebody's doing this manually. Would be the conversation point I think we would also need to discuss. I think the aim for doing this would be to automate as much as possible to remove the potential for a human to make these kind of mistakes or to hack the system would be my my opinion. But certainly, you know, point taken. You know, sometimes some people will manually do this, but in an automated system, there's certainly ways around that.
Right. So if there's an automated system in place, do we still include those, you know, those variables as inputs? You know, they're technically are like build instructions. They still ultimately get passed into the build, even if it's coming from an encrypted or automated source. I'm almost wondering if maybe we should store instead, you know, put in the provenance like a pointer and just say we reference this variable in this location, you know, that's stored in an encrypted location at this point in time, but perhaps not actually state the value of that variable itself.
Yeah, that would be my thought, is that we're never really exposing what the value is. We're just noting where you know, where it's stored, like in a key cloak or some other type of environment, wherever you might store that encrypted information.
Yeah, the point is to be able to reproduce the build, right? So if your build service can reproduce the build, it has enough information. Whether I don't think anyone's suggesting you store all of that secret information as part of the provenance metadata, but that there is enough information in the provenance metadata that you'd be able to reproduce the build at a later point.
Yeah.
And I think the other part that's worth thinking about is that SLSA today is increasingly like one of the proposals in the roadmap for 1.0 is tightening the scope a bit, so it's just about that build integrity piece. So it's when you're thinking about reproducibility, it's really like, can I recreate the same subject to the same output artifact? And so how many of those secrets are actually directly influencing the produced artifact as well? So you wouldn't necessarily, if you're running a vulnerability scanner as part of your pipeline, and you need a secret to authenticate to it, that secret is not necessary to reproduce the artifact that the provenance metadata is describing, right? Sorry, I think I jumped the queue a bit. I saw Matt and Mike.
Oh,
had their
no.
hands up.
Yeah, the only thing I was just gonna say, yeah, like the way that and I know that this is not available for everybody yet, but yeah, like the way we've sort of done it is like often the secret is something that is like a pointer to some location where the secret is or whatever, and you know, that's how you're requesting the build. You know, the build itself would request the secret, get a token, that kind of thing. Yeah, I think like generally it's just, you know, whatever, to repeat a lot of what other folks have been saying, is just mostly about like I've been using the term repeat the build as opposed to reproduce the build, just because reproduce often has the connotation of like bit for bit sort of reproducibility, whereas repeat is kind of like I'm able to just sort of run the same thing multiple times, and I have, you know, information that, hey, this source code was run with these parameters. This source code was with these parameters and this build script or whatever. That means I can go in, you know, and this was also the build environment. So now I can go in and repeat that build, you know, because the spirit of what we're trying to get across here is, yeah, like, can you, if given the same build environment, by that I just mean like, you know, container, image, OS, whatever, packages, yada yada, build script, source code, and parameters, could I rerun the thing? And then it's okay to say certain things like secrets are things you need to essentially re-request because we don't, you know, record or log the secrets. Separately, I think, you know, we also need to just sort of like, if folks are sort of worried because they're like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm putting my secrets in the clear, I think that's sort of a separate problem where we say like, I would almost be, you know, if I record that and I go, oh, wow, I should not be doing that and know to fix it, rather than just sort of say, hey, I don't record my builds because I might be doing something silly in those builds. I'd much rather know that I'm doing something bad and go and correct it than just say, you know what, I might be doing something bad. I'd rather not know.
Got it. Okay, so I think at this point I have enough information to bring this back. It sounds like what I'm hearing is that the key piece here is just being able to either repeat the build, as you said, or reproduce the build. But the key point is that you have the instructions that are necessary, and we don't necessarily have to add the value of any environment variables into the provenance. It can just be a pointer showing, like, we used this value that came from this place at this point in time. And, you know, if you want to know what that value is to repeat the build, then go look it up there.
I was just going to ask quickly, Sam, are you guys looking at essentially generating these in GitLab for every single job in the pipeline?
We are. So we're looking at just doing this by default for any artifact that's built inside of GitLab, which, you know, again, we have such a wide variety of projects inside of GitLab. You know, we have a lot of users and a lot of different scenarios and circumstances. And, you know, by and large, typically we don't see people manually putting in variables, but we do see them storing them as environment variables, and they may even be taking appropriate precautions to mask them, you know, protect them, make them hidden and so forth. But you know, those do still ultimately get fed in, and they also reference, you know, variables from other systems. Like we have an integration with Vault, so they may be referencing secrets stored in Vault as part of their build instructions. And so, you know, even if it's being brought in an encrypted, automated fashion, those are still build inputs. And so that's where we were running into that confusion about how might we meet this SLSA requirement without exposing those secrets. But I think I have what I need here to move forward. I think the takeaway for me is likely what we'll do is avoid storing any values at all in the automatically generated provenance, and instead focus on just pointing to the time and location of any build inputs.
Cool. Do you think we need an issue here on the SLSA side to clarify the documentation around this? Sounds like maybe based on this.
I think that would be helpful. Yes.
Okay. Anyone want to volunteer? Me?
I think Sam
I
did.
brought it up. I'm happy to open it.
Yeah, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
that would be awesome.
Sure, that'd be good. Thanks, Sam. We've got an existing one around reproducibility where I'm going to add a couple of the comments from this discussion, but if you could file one about the initial confusion, the build instruction piece, that would be useful.
Cool. Anything else on that topic? Cool. The next one's pretty easy or pretty short. We chatted last time about the community spec and adopting that within SLSA. We're working through that and hope to have a proposal to come back to the community with. There was a few outstanding issues that we need to get through around the scope of SLSA, which I know is a work in progress thing, and the governance, because we have a governance structure now with a steering committee, and so looking at that again. So hope to have more updates probably next meeting. And then the one thing here is we do need some points of contact for the code of conduct. Melba, thank you for volunteering. If anyone else would like to volunteer, add your name or just email me directly. And that's it for me. And Isaac, you want to do a shout out for your blog post?
Oops,
Thanks,
sorry,
Jeff.
I'm on mute. Yeah, just to raise awareness of this blog post, Brandon created a PR for it recently. This is a revision of a a document I posted to the community a few weeks back. We've incorporated some feedback. We've taken a pass at it, and I'd love to get feedback broadly from the community. The link is in Slack. There's a little bit of discussion in Slack, but to Abhishek's point, I think the most productive thing would be to move discussion, comments, feedback, disagreements, add to the PR itself. So I invite everyone to do that. Thanks in advance. Really appreciate your input. Emmy, I appreciate your input as well. I know you gave some feedback on the early draft. Michael, same to you as well. I appreciate that. So please look for your previous feedback to incorporate it in this draft. Let me know if you think that it's not. And yeah, looking forward to getting this out with y'all's review and approval. Thank you.
Cool. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna briefly just say, good blog post. And I think one of the things that it's kind of also related to some of the other issues that some folks have been bringing up that should be interesting. And there's a bunch of initiatives across the CNCF, OpenSSF to start doing some of these like mappings and how, like, who's, what standards, best practices are responsible for what. That could prove to be really interesting. And then I also know that some folks have been chatting about, could we do like a SLSA OSCAL model potentially once maybe we're a little bit closer to like something like 1.0.
It's a great idea, and I think it comes back to the idea that Joshua's proposal for the work streams. I think that would be a alignment with adjacencies. Work stream topic could be OSCAL. I think that the mapping thing has been super interesting to think about SSDF, because there's definitely the mapping in terms of the SLSA requirements to SSDF tasks and practices, and there's the question of kind of the scope of the coverage there, just the recommendations and requirements themselves. I think there's also a useful comparison to be made between SSDF and SLSA, with SSDF being a descriptive, non-prioritized, non-sequenced set of tasks, whereas SLSA is much more prescriptive. It's implicitly sequenced by the levels. I think it actually makes SLSA an interesting and useful complement to SSDF. That SLSA, it feels to me, has the flavor of a transformation framework where you can grab on the bottom rung of the ladder, and whatever rung you're on, the next rung is usually within reach, and you can climb up these rungs. And I think just from a pragmatic standpoint, I really like the approachability of SLSA for folks who aren't skilled in the arts of interpreting and complying with government regulations. So I definitely encourage you all to take a look at the blog post draft with those two things in mind: the kind of the scope of the requirements and how they map, but then also the nature of the two frameworks themselves and how those approaches differ.
A couple of hands up. I can't see the name. I don't know why.
Emmy is up next.
I wonder why. It happened last time too. Yeah, hi, I'm Emmy Eddy from Red Hat. So I might have missed this at the very beginning. Do you have an estimated time on when this will go out, Isaac?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that the last blog post we did along these lines was with SLSA and SBOM, and I think that was in this review period for about a week or so. It would be great to aim for that same amount, but I dare say, we'd like to get broad consensus and folks nodding along with the content in the blog post. They may not agree with every line, but if they agree with the spirit of the blog post as a guest post with the specified byline, getting it out within a week or so, I think, should be practical.
Okay. So a couple of thoughts here. I made a note in the document itself about the mapping piece. So I have that mapping in a spreadsheet of like each control and which SSDF control, like which SSDF line it goes to. But there's also excuse me, NIST SP 800-161R1 that has extensive detail in it that also directly maps. Is that something that we wanted to mention in the blog post? it's just another resource for folks looking into salsa, right?
I think that would be great. Would you mind pinging that to me, Emmy, and I can take a look and where we might anchor that in the blog post. That would be great.
Yep.
I think the other thing, Emmy, since you're here, that you raised a really interesting input on the last draft around automation and tooling itself, and I think I think it's a good point. I think that Salsa definitely needs an automation and tooling component. It's not clear to me the extent to which we think of tools and automation as within the scope of Salsa itself versus, the enabling ecosystem around Salsa. And so I think your point, Emmy, is well taken, that tools and automation are an essential piece of making Salsa ultimately scalable and adoptable. But the specification itself doesn't speak to or cover automation or tooling. I don't know what other people think about, how people think about the scope of Salsa in that frame.
Yeah.
I could make a comment on that. This is Eric Tice. In context, in the best practices working group and the tooling working groups for OpenSSF, this is the topic that's come up. I brought some of this up before, but it'd be great to actually have some cases shown with some example pipelines put together that adhere to the Salsa framework based on the tools that are suggested in those working groups, and having some actual actionable workflows and cases that show each level of Salsa compliance. So the framework itself is still a framework. It's not a tool set, but leveraging the others to utilize what their charters are to implement Salsa as a core framework and provide examples as to what tools you can leverage to effectively manage a Salsa adherent pipeline.
I like that, Eric. It feels like, potentially there's, I know we had tooling as a proposed work stream, and potentially that's something which that work stream could pick up, is looking at, what are the key, kind of user or practitioner journeys around Salsa, and what tools today support them, either custom built tools for Salsa specifically, or tools that are existing in the ecosystem which are adding support for Salsa, like GitHub Actions, like SigStore and so on. But I think I really like that framing, Eric.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
Just to tack onto that, and the reason I put it into the blog post is based on the content of the blog post. You're targeting, how is this consumable? There are a lot of frameworks out there for a lot of different security things, and it's extraordinarily overwhelming for what was mentioned in the blog post, which is organizations that are smaller, that don't have these large engineering organizations in them and don't know how to tackle it. I think if we're framing it in a way to say, hey, we had, when this was built, automation was in mind, and applicability or putting it into practice was put in mind. Because if we are going through the Salsa requirements and it's happened a few times where it's like, hey, this is the control, but we don't really have a good way to verify it, we need to rethink that control and how we're putting that out there, because it's not going to be, a customer's not going to understand that we can't verify that Salsa requirement, so we're never going to be able to meet it. So having automation in mind at the same time as we're creating a framework, at the same time we're talking about the framework, is going to increase adoption, right? And so that was my intention of kind of highlighting that.
That's a great point, and let me take that and make sure we do weave that in to explicitly say that the Salsa working groups considers automation as a critical piece of adoption. We're working on it. We have our attention on it. And there is a work stream around it. I think you're right. That's an important point to land. That yes, we consider the tooling ecosystem around Salsa as critical to adoption, and we have a focus on it.
So two things along those lines. One is, I think also one of the things that it's not just not just the automation tooling that helps us sort of achieve SLSA. But also like there's kind of a hierarchy of like you have your SSDF, which is very descriptive. You have your SLSA, which is prescriptive, but still sort of very agnostic on how you sort of get there. And then there's kind of a level down there of like, if you're in the cloud native space, this is sort of what that looks for you. If you're in the legacy space, this is more of what it looks like for you. And then here are specific examples. And one to just call out, just because it's one of the things I run for the OpenSSF Supply Chain Integrity Working Group. There's a tool called Fresca, which is sort of built on top of like Tecton and Tecton chains and Keyverno and other OpenSSF and CNCF projects that do have examples of sort of like SLSA 1, 2, 3 sort of pipelines, and so that it also helps sort of show like, hey, if you're doing these sorts of things, and you don't have signing keys or whatever, we can do SLSA 1 for this is what SLSA 1 would look like. If you have signing keys and a build service, this is what SLSA 2 does for you. Hey, if you're using Spiffy Spire and very short-lived identities where we can sort of do more of that non-falsifiability, this is what SLSA 3 looks like, and so on.
Cool. Thanks, Isaac.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Michael, Emmy.
We got 14 minutes. Marcus, can we put you on the spot for a little quick overview? Or do you want to wait till next call?
No, I can just give a quick overview if you want.
Great.
Okay, yeah, so let's begin. So last year we noticed that SLSA exists, basically, yeah, fresh as it was published. We went and presented it to our management, and management likes it. They like having certifications, like showing something off, and so on. And they tasked us with doing a gap analysis to see what exactly is missing with our build service, with our product development. And they set us the goal to have something to announce here at SUSECon. SUSECon is happening this week, so started 2 days ago. Just to emphasize that SUSE is focusing really on supply chain security and improving supply chain security. So we're coming to SLSA largely from the outside, so we haven't been able to really participate, mostly of time constraint issue and so on. So we implemented this from looking at from the outside on your web pages, on your documentation, on your standards, and so on. So and worked from that angle. Our SUSE Linux enterprise products are built by a build service that we also call build service, something that SUSE has developed on their own, and also open source, called OpenSUSE or Open Build Service. And we've been doing that for 15 years plus. So it's also second generation. So there was something before that it was derived from. And we have actually went through common criteria certification on top of that, found that kind of similar to what SLSA is achieving. SLSA is more descriptive, more focused on actually the build service parts. So that we also really like that part. So we went and took a look. So what the build service is doing for us at SUSE is that it manages our packages that in turn gets built into RPMs mostly. It stores the packages in separate projects, and copying them between projects is there's an abstraction called submit request. You can think of it like a pull request that can be handled by that can be monitored by or that can be reviewed, that can be accepted by humans or bots, depending on the configuration. So it's quite flexible. We modeled our release processes on this kind of sources come from one place, one project to the other. We modeled our release processes on top of that, both for our OpenSUSE product and also for our SLES products. So the build service stores these sources. It actually builds them in these kind of projects, in this kind of hermetic setting. And even as I joined SUSE like 20 years ago, it was already doing change root builds that turned into KVM builds that turned into focusing on these builds in a build cluster in a separate data center. So it does the source management, it does the build management, and in the end it produces and also signs RPMs. It collects RPMs into FTP trees, into ISOs, into container images these days, or several forms of public cloud images. So it's something really from checking in the sources to having the final binary result. So we took a look, and the kind of build part, like the semantic, ephemeral, these kind of conditions, at least what we read from the standard, we are meeting. And we communicated that back to our management. Management said, please reach SLSA level 4, at least for the 0.1 standard. So we interpreted that and went through that. So we had, what we had to do in the last months is that we really had to do more enforcement. So we had some policy enforcement of 2-person reviews, but as far as we understand SLSA, it's really mandating that it's technologically enforced and not policy enforced. So that was a bigger change that we had to go through. And of course, the whole provenance topic. So we really started generating provenance from scratch in our tooling. So the build service was keeping this kind of build environment structure already, but in an internal format, an internal XML plain text blob. So that's something that our team, our build service implementation team, worked on to generate in total provenance, and that's something where we reached I think a good level. We still need to sync with the actual in total efforts if that is all meeting what is wanted there, what is needed there. What else? So with administration, with the common part, this fourth pillar, that was a bit interesting, because at the same time that we are using the build service, a separate team is also developing it and operating it. So that kind of challenge, like the operation challenge, that it also needs to have the similar restrictions, similar as only a small human interaction as possible. 2-person reviews also for administration tasks. That is interesting for a DevOps style developed build service a bit. So there we had to do some adjustments to help with that. And so and I also offered a white paper together. So with our documentation team on a very quick basis, that I'm not sure if you have the link, but it was an email thread. I can supply it. So so you see us basically as implementers that just looked at this from the outside, took all the points and went through it. Of course, we want to continue this work. So we see that we can join the community calls here and follow the further standardization approach. So looking at the 1.0 standard that you mentioned earlier. And if we can meet that, if we can also help influence that a bit, or help you help here with our view on Linux distribution development. So I think that is a very short 7-minute summary.
Very, very cool. Did you mention, you said you have a white paper that you're either working on? Okay, awesome.
Yeah, I have we have a white paper. I'm not sure if I have it right now. Paste it here.
Yeah, it'd be great if you'd be interested in doing a blog post on the SLSA blog too, as kind of like a case study. I think we've been talking about trying to get more of those. I think it'd be really helpful to see how someone's actually achieved this. Mike, you have questions?
Oh yeah. I think one of the things I know I'm very interested in is like you're generating this SLSA provenance metadata. You know, how are you distributing that to, let's say, the end users, or how are they consuming it so that somebody who's consuming these packages can go in and say, yeah, Yep, I validated that this is, a Salsa 4 package coming from SUSE.
So currently we put the JSON files besides our RPMs, so on our FTP trees. Not sure if there's anything better, so that we have not looked into that deeply yet. And also how to do this for ISOs, if we can merge that or if you can put this in a bigger blob. Also containers, that's something we have also not yet deeply looked at. Yeah, and the whole angle, like how can users look at that, that's also an open topic that we need to investigate still.
So I'm curious if this is implemented by default in all OpenSUSE build service instances, or if it's just like for the enterprise. I don't even know. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, so this is implemented in our open build service open source instance, and we have so both our two hosted instances for OpenSUSE and our hosted instance for the internal SLS development is both generating the provenance now. Yeah.
Cool. Find a link on the for like Tumbleweed or Leap or something and have a look then. Thanks.
Yeah, we had a bit of trouble with. I still have, I think, on my item how to get provenance signed and how to verify signatures. That's something I still need to find out. But so we are already doing this wrapping based 64 encoded wrapping and signing. But how to, if the signature is correct, I've not yet looked at that. That's also an open topic for me.
Offline, I can definitely point you in the right direction. I think a lot of the SIG-Store folks have, good, as well as the Intoda folks have good thoughts around that.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. All right. Well, that was a good meeting. Thanks, everyone. And yeah, feel free to add agenda items for next time, and we'll get some work streams set up and make some progress. So thanks everyone for joining today. Have a good one.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.